Welcome everyone to this month's craft marketing. I'm Edessa Paulzine. I'm a member of the AMA Madison group that's putting this free event for you guys along with Winbound. So just some intro slides here before we go to our presentation today. Upcoming events from AMA Madison. Next month's craft marketing event is with Egan Heath, and he will talk about 3 must-have strategies for e-commerce. So keep your eyes peeled on that. We'll have the registration up sometime this week, and so um, we'll send it out along with a follow-up email from this event. And then we have our annual conference coming up this year. Steve, do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Sure. We have our annual conference will be virtual starting at noon on the 30th of September. Grant was at our conference a couple of years back, had a great presentation there. We have other great speakers just like Grant from around the country that are going to be there, including Scott Brinker, Chief Marketing Technology guy over at HubSpot, and also runs the Chief Martech blog. George Hansen coming in from Panera Bread. Some other great speakers. Would love to see you there. We'll have that out on Eventbrite in the coming days, and then there'll be a full landing page on our website at amamadison.org, where you can learn a little more about all the different speakers that are there. Great. And then we want you to join AMA Madison, right? So thanks to all our guests that are here, as well as our members. Join AMA Madison and then volunteer when you're a part of AMA Madison. It's a fun organization, great way to connect and interact with other marketers, folks that you have interests with. We get together for socials, in-person events. We'll be starting those up in October. A lot of great access to some national resources as well for marketers. And it's a great way to interact with marketers, not just here in the Madison community, but over the rest of the country, 77 different local chapters. And then you can join us on Slack for local marketing news and updates, job postings, conversations about everything and anything marketing as well. And there's the Slack channel address there. We will be sending out a copy of the presentation and a video of the presentation sometime probably next week. So if you missed any of these addresses or can't read your writing like I do after one of these meetings, then you can see it there too. But would love to have you be a part of AMA Madison.
Steve, Carrie Brown wanted me to mention, I think it's really important to pass this along, that AMA is looking for someone to help on the communications front, to drive the help on the whole communications team. So that'll include working with craft marketing effort, the signature series, and the annual conference that you just mentioned is coming up. So Carrie is in the chat right now. So if you'd like to join this fun, happy, crazy go nuts group, please join us and volunteer. Great way to meet a lot of people.
Yeah, well, great. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Thanks, Steve. And so thank you to our sponsor for tonight's event, which is a Winbound, aka Greg Michio. Greg, you want to talk about Winbound a little bit and what you do?
Sure. Winbound, we are a content marketing agency, and we produce content really focused on manufacturing and industrial clients, small marketing departments that need help generating content. And the content really focuses throughout the sales funnel. And on SEO, it works with the sales team and on the social front. And part of when we say it works throughout the sales funnel, we're talking about top of funnel content, helping people to get to know you. And when we create content like that, we like to collaborate with other people. And one of the people that we collaborated in the past in creating content for our own site was Grant. I heard Grant speak, I don't know, a couple, 2, 3, 4 years ago at AMA Madison's. It was a annual conference, and he, every now and then you see a lot of speakers. They're very good. Grant was just exceptional, and I think what really amazed me about it was that he was taking qualitative approaches, and but he was also adding a quantitative element to it. And as he'll tell you today, he doesn't do any qualitative anymore. It's all quant. And the thinking behind it and the approach that he was taking was just so amazing, and the emotional data that he's going to chat with you about really blew me away. So, we collaborated with him on a blog post about emotional data, and he's one of these people that I always bring up to my clients because I always want people to work with this guy because I think he just generates some amazing results. So I think he's going to share some very interesting things today. I'm going to turn it over to Grant. Take it away, Grant. Thanks so much for fitting us into your schedule and for being here today.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone. What is up, Madison crew? I was just talking about how kind of bummed I was because last time I think I spoke with you all there, I actually got to be in Madison, and I had a heck of a time. I love Madison, and I spent money there, so which is what you're supposed to do, kind of like, the whole tourism thing. Can you guys see my screen? Is it
We
full
can.
screen?
We can. We can.
Hang on a second. Let me do this. Sometimes you got to do a little magic thing with Zoom. There.
That's much better. Perfect.
Full view? All right. So, and I'll put all you on here so I can see your amazing faces. All right. Oh, this is much better. Sometimes when I do these, I can't see anybody. And it's a huge bummer because so much of speaking is just being able to react to people. So I don't mind if anybody interrupts me. I don't know if format, if you can do that. It looks like people are going to be paying attention. So little background on me before I get going. So I was a mergers and acquisitions analyst, not didn't come out of marketing or agency world or anything like that. I was a nerd and I was a nerd, currently a nerd, and was doing analysis around business, in particular on the valuation and acquisition side. So one of the things that I was working with was a lot of interview data, qualitative data, quant data around customers, customer insights for transactioning entities. So say you buy another organization, you need to know as much as you can about that organization because there is by the way, 70% chance that the business that you buy, you will run in the ground in 3 years, which is absolutely terrifying thought, but an actual statistic. And and was part of the reason that we set out on the adventure that we did to try and do better. So years later, we have focused our organization very heavily in neuroscience, behavioral economics, and working with data. And we created our own set of metadata for the purpose of quantifying emotional resonance. And that is what we do today. We've done over 400 different individual studies in the last 8 years. We've worked with several hundred organizations, from great big monster companies that ignore what we do so they can satisfy their own political endeavors. Did I say that out loud? Down to very small funded startups and kind of everybody in between. So this was that's enough about me. What we're going to talk about today is an article that I wrote that was based on a lot of the things that I learned along my journey around qual. I was, in fact, a qualitative analyst, coding of focus group data and interview data and converting that data in the more I learned about neuroscience and the more I learned about behavioral economics, the more I learned that, boy, this is really quite dangerous. And in working with clients over the years, I see that there are a lot of times, especially when we're sort of desperate for innovation, we're desperate for ideas, and when certain things aren't looking, we engage in qual, which is not an irresponsible thing to do. But we engage in qual, and we take the responses that we see in or that we get from that qualitative analysis, and then we implement them. And the point I really want to get across today is that is extremely irresponsible. So I'm gonna share with you the top 5 reasons why I think running with qual is extremely dangerous and detrimental, specifically around customer conversations and specifically around focus groups. And the first 2 of these I'm going to spend the most time on, which are people lie and people attempt to justify their emotional decisions with logic. And I'm going to spend the most time with those 2 because they're the most significant. And then the other 3 are fairly self-explanatory. But let's jump in here. So why do we understand emotions? I'll address this a couple times. So one of the major aha moments that we had when we were building this company is that human beings don't use their logic brain when they make decisions, really at all. We think we do, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but we actually don't. When we say that we're an emotional species, we're emotional beings, it's really sort of more a fact than it is a saying. And finding ways to measure those emotions is unbelievably challenging. The first place we looked actually was biomimicry to try and figure out if there were behavioral indicators around quantifying emotion that would allow us to very accurately understand and depict what people were thinking. And boy, just the science just isn't there yet. It's getting better all the time, but it will be the future of research. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well at the end. So with no further ado, right, one, people lie, okay? So people lie. Now, when I say that, it's kind of like, oh yeah, people do lie. No, I don't think you understand. Everybody lies. And I don't mean like, oh, like everybody, I mean like you lie all the time. And first of all, you intentionally lie. And we say there's 2 types of lies. There's intentional lying and unintentional lying. And we break intentional lying up into 2 major categories. Selfish lies, and sort of selfish lies are lies that we do intentionally to further ourselves, our situation, or make an impression on someone. And altruistic lies, which are more like white lies. Now, selfish lies are in many ways predicated on social norms. So things that people are likely to lie about are things like, especially in a research function, are things like recycling, going to church, right? Things that society would deem to be acceptable or desirable. And that is because of how the limbic system of our brain operates. We are very conscientious of our social disposition. It's one of the most highly developed parts of our brain. And so we many times lie about things to make sort of an impression on someone. That's sort of selfish lies. White lies are wildly acceptable in American culture. They are done. We white lie all the time, and we white lie to not hurt people's feelings. We don't like hurting people's feelings in this country. And if you traveled outside the United States, you'll notice it's not quite that way in other places. But we're extremely sensitive here, and we tell white lies. I tell white lies to my wife all the time. You know why? Because I'm a good husband, or at least I try to be. And so you know, we all do it, and it's in many ways ironically deemed rude not to. And this is the way that our society and our culture operates. And there's nothing wrong with that, unless you're trying to get to the bottom of something, unless you're trying to get the truth, unless you're trying to understand someone's visceral emotion. What you're doing instead is you're getting this filtered response that confines to a social norm, which is said there's nothing wrong with that, but in a research capacity, it makes working with data completely useless. So here's something else a little exercise that I created to show you about unintentional lying. Now, if you're super duper young, this can be challenging. We had, I threw this up for our team when I built this, and one of our younger team members, one of our psychiatrists, she said, I said, think back to 9/11. This is what I want you to do right now. I want you to think back to 9/11. Think back to all these details. Okay. And I think poor Jess on our team said, I was 2. And I was like, oh, and so I'm way older than that. That was a very depressing moment. But I want you to think back to 9/11, all right? And I want you to, if you have something in front of you, or whether it's your phone, I want you to kind of write this down. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to show you something very interesting. So 1, I want you to think about this. How did you find out about the attack? And write down the answer. All right. Who were you with? All right. And what were you doing? Who was the first person you told? And then the last one, what did you do the rest of the day? All right. So by a show of hands, who thinks that they're wildly confident in that the answers that they wrote down are correct? So there's something called a very, very popular and fascinating study that has been done for decades. And this was one of the most famous. And these studies are called flashbulb studies. Now, what happens is the brain operates very similar to how a timeline might operate. So imagine if you are looking at, like in a museum or something, and you see like a big timeline of the United States, right? Sort of like with the dates at the bottom with like hash marks for major events. And you'll see that there are thicknesses that exist, right? So like probably the more significant events will have like a really thick hash mark and a picture and a big story. And maybe sort of a less significant event might have like a sort of a thin hash mark. So like the birth of Abraham Lincoln, maybe like a small hash, but the death of Abraham Lincoln might be like a really big hash mark. Your brain sort of operates in very similar ways, i.e. if there's something traumatic or if there's something highly emotional, your brain tends to remember that event with a little bit more detail. So very significant events in your life, like your lots of firsts that you have in your life, for instance, like the day you were married, the birth of a child, you can have a lot of really great visceral recall around these types of events. So here's what's really fascinating. Here's the statistics. 3 out of the 5 things that you wrote down are correct, which means 2 of them are wrong. Now, who thinks that they're still wildly confident that their responses are actually still correct? So here's what's fascinating. This particular study was the last one that they did on 9/11. They did over 10 years, and they studied about 3,000 people. And what they did was they asked them questions similar to these. These are some of the exact questions that they asked, as a matter of fact. And then what they did is they made them write down the answers to them. And there was just like I had you do, and there's a very specific reason why. What they would do is they went back in 1 year and they asked them the same questions. And you know what they found? The answers were a little bit different. And they were, oh yeah. And then they went back in 5 years, and then went back in 10 years. And the reason that they had people write them down is because they didn't believe that what they wrote down was correct. They would look at what they would, if they were to print these things off or have people type them, they would go back and say, you changed my answer. And they would even look and say, well, I don't know why I wrote that, because that's not what happened. And here's the reason why. Your brain is absolutely garbage at remembering details. You think it's really good. It's horrible. This means that a lot of the details that you recall from your wedding or some of life's most significant events did not happen. Conversations did not happen that you remember having. Your brain made them up, and it fills in gaps. This is what the analysis looks like. This has been proven over and over again. After about a year, you have about a 60% decline in the accuracy of your memories. And then it stays fairly consistent as you go out for 10 years and starts to trail off naturally. That means that if you are trying to do you guys remember, this was like a big story a couple of years ago, where there was like a news guy and he was in a helicopter in Iraq or something like that. And he told this story about how his helicopter crashed. And he got kind of in trouble because everybody was like, dude, you were not in that helicopter. You were in the helicopter that was behind him, and that helicopter crashed. And they went down, and his helicopter went down, and he got out and experienced the crash, but he wasn't in it. And you can look this up. It was a very famous story. And I remember, I've done a lot of this research, and I remember looking at that guy, and people are calling him out, really dragging this guy through the mud. And you can see on his face, if you go back and look at this, utter and sincere confusion. There are people that are being they're bringing up these people that were like, I was the commander, I was in the I was the pilot that was flying this helicopter that crashed, and this guy was not in there. And you can see this guy's face is just bewildered because his mind made these details real. And so this is something that is a fascinating element of psychology that people don't really talk about that much. The reason that this is wildly significant is like everybody here absolutely swears. And by the way, I did this. I called my roommate that I lived with at the time. We worked at the same company. And I was like, all right, dude, well, let's talk about what happened. And he swears we went into the office later that afternoon. And I'm like, dude, we did not go into the office, man. And he was like, we went into the office, and we could not agree. One of us is wrong. I don't know which one, but it was true for us. And this has been proven time and time again. And there's lots of authors, like I think Malcolm Gladwell wrote a great piece in one of his books on this. But this is one of the reasons that we have to be very, very careful around looking at visceral recall when it comes to events and details around purchasing behavior, around why someone did something when they're reflecting backwards. Because anything that goes backwards in time, the brain fills in the gaps, and you simply can't trust it. So one of the things we always do to combat this is we measure things looking forward instead of backwards. So something to keep in mind. Fair enough? I could have just gone to the slide. I said that, but it's freaky. I remember reading this and being like, it kind of rocked my world a little bit. Knowing that, oh my gosh, conversations, events, a helicopter crash. Guy was absolutely, you could see it in his face if you go back and look at that. Really fascinating stuff. All right. The second big one is that people attempt to justify their emotions with logic. And there's a couple reasons for that. First of all, you turn your attention to a guy named Dr. Antonio Damasio, who is a famous researcher from USC. He's a neuroscientist or neurologist. And he was one of the first people that did consciousness studies around parts of the brain that operate when it comes to decision making. And one of the fascinating things that we learned with Dr. Damasio's work, this is about 20 years ago, was that the frontal lobe of the brain, which is the logic brain, that's the smart part of our brain. That's a part of our brain that like we're really proud of. That's a part of the brain that like does math and stuff like this. And this is the limbic system of the brain, right back here. This is the most evolved part of our brain. It's our dum-dum brain. But it really makes all of the decision input and output all comes through here. And every once in a while, some estimate as high as 5% of our decisions will actually go and be made kind of up here in our smart brain. And that is a conservative estimate. That 5% might be on the high side. So we just really hardly ever use logic at all. And it would be a bell curve as far as how that operates. When it comes to making decisions, this means the same part of your brain that you use to buy a car is the same part of your brain that you use when you buy a sandwich, which is infuriatingly frustrating as a species. You think we'd be more significant. We'd be a little bit more of a responsible species than that, but essentially we aren't. So one of the things that we do when we are explaining why we purchase things is we engage that smart part of our brain, because the social brain says, hey, time to be smart, the spotlight is on you. And one of the reasons is because of the social brain really is in charge most of the time, especially when in conversation. We'll address this in just a second as well on number 5. But our self-image and our consciousness is more directly correlated to our smart brain than it is our limbic system of our brain. So kind of like not only is our brain very lazy, but it tries to we try to paint ourselves in the best light possible for the most part. And so if you ask someone, why might you, oh, why did you buy that? You're probably going to get a logical answer. Like think about when someone buys a car, or when you bought a car last and someone asks you, why'd you buy that car? Almost assuredly, you did not give them the right answer. You gave them a lie. That was logic based. Most common answer with that question for each measured, I got a good deal on it. You know why we say that? So that we don't say, well, you know what? I got a raise and I wanted everyone to know, or I want a big client and I want everyone to know that I'm doing well. Or, you know what? I deserve this. Or when I got in it, it just felt right. Or I want you to think I have more money than I actually have. Or when I sat in it, it just sort of felt right. These are, did I say that? I feel like I said the same thing twice. But all of these sort of emotional things will sound like an idiot if we say those things out loud. And our social brain will not allow that to happen. So we give a very logical answer so that we paint ourselves in the best light. I got a good deal on it. Well, I got a new job and it's farther away, so I needed something with better gas mileage. Reason, logic. We're justifying what we're saying, and it's simply not correct. We are not getting to the root of core decision making because our emotive brain is in charge. Number 3, your interviewees are not a representative sample of your buyer. As a matter of fact, rarely ever is this the case. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first reason is that if you have gone for a client, it's mostly marketers here, right? So if it's your organization or it's a client's organization, you're going to ask if you can talk to some customers, and they're going to say sure, and they're going to give you a list, or they're going to give you access to something where you can go target. These are their good customers. These are the customers they know will talk to you. And generally, and we've been working on a way to try and figure out how to prove this for a long time, and we haven't figured out a great reason, but here's a hypothesis that we have here at Proof, and that is that your 10 best clients are complete outliers. They have absolutely nothing in common. You think they do, or you try and find something that they have in common for the purposes of trying to recreate them. Like, man, our 3 best customers are banks. We need to go find more banks. Be like, it has nothing to do with the fact that they're a bank. That's a completely irrelevant variable. It has something to do with something that's immeasurable, and it's a personality or a personal relationship. There's a lot of variables at play, but typically we call this the outlier principle, right? The probability of one of your best customers being typified at all with who your customer actually looks like is very, very low. So think about what the demographics, psychographics, or customer characteristics that you believe are significant when you are targeting a potential customer. And this is seemingly easy to do, but here's the thing. Do we know if that's significant? Do we know if it's an industry? I know Greg pretty well. He's ornery like I am, so we get along. Greg targets manufacturing companies. And so one of the things that I tell him is to say that it's very simple and easy to target manufacturing companies because you can identify SIC codes, right? You know what a manufacturer looks like, smells like. And I said, but you need to think about this as though the fact that they're a manufacturer is a complete coincidence. It has nothing to do with the fact that they are a manufacturer. It has something to do with the output of the reason that they are a manufacturer, and those series of variables are the reasons that they make a great client. So for instance, if marketing were just that easy, our jobs wouldn't exist. Marketing would be the easiest job in the world. Dear female between the ages of 35 and 55, I have a product for you. That's what it would be. If demographics were significant, that is how marketing would be done, but they aren't. There is something emotional about a female between the ages of 35 and 55 that make them a good target. Identifying those emotions and quantifying them in a usable way, that is the hard part. And that's the part that we try to tackle. Number 4, you cannot repeat an emotional purchasing moment. It drives me nuts. And we have clients we help do this with. There are retailers that have no touch on their customer. And well, can you find out, why they purchased this? No, we can't figure out why. That's our job to measure emotions, and we can't do it. Because imagine you're standing in line at the grocery store and you're feeling a series of emotions. There's someone in front of you, right? And they are, oh my God, are they going to write a check? They're going to write a check. I got to go, and a checkbook is coming out, and there's one series of emotions. We have a baby crying behind us, and you're getting stressed out. All you want to do is get out of there. And at the last moment, you reach out and buy a pack of gum. Now, did you buy the pack of gum because why? Something reasonable and logical? I like the brand. Oh, the brand really spoke to me. Or did you just need to do something so that you didn't scream? How am I supposed to recreate these series of emotional buying emotions, the cocktail that exists when our brain leaks out norepinephrine and dopamine and serotonin in these different ways? How are we supposed to repeat that? The answer is you can't. You cannot do it. We try to do it all the time. We ask and we take that data and we run with it. And the data that we get back is absolutely garbage. So don't bother. Number 5, you. Why? Because you are you. You know what? People are pretty dang different. Some of us look the way we are. I'm sarcastic and kind of a smart ass. And I might look a certain way that you like or don't like. I might look like somebody that is your boss or a coworker that you like or don't like, or your cousin that you can't stand. I mean, all of these things are significant variables because your social brain is absolutely in charge. And so the fact that you exist is an unremovable bias. And one of the reasons that qualitative is so dangerous. And if you've ever been or viewed a focus group, you can see that there are, and I've, used to do that. And now I'm like, oh my, it's embarrassing. But you can see moderation and how moderators look and how they approach certain things. First of all, you'll see them leading the witness unintentionally because they're trying to get to an output to help you, right? Like they know you're behind the glass. They're trying to help you, and they lead the witness sometimes without realizing it because they're trying to help create a box. The human mind is a box. I need to wrap my head around that for a second. Is kind of a real thing. Being able to wrap your head around something is how the mind naturally operates. And so the fact that you're there at all wildly biases people's outputs and makes data that we get from qualitative conversations very unreliable. So just putting this in so I don't leave you and be like, well, that was a huge bummer, Grant. Thanks for that, dude. So what does this mean? What are we supposed to do about this, right? So I still am a firm believer that, y'all, if you're not talking to your customers, that means you're not trying, right? Or if you're not talking to your clients' customers, that means you're not trying. You must be very careful. That the whole point of this is to give you caution. You must be very careful. Treat the information that you get back as a hypothesis, not as a strategy or tactic. Our brain tends to gravitate towards interesting ideas. If an interesting idea comes out of a customer interview or a focus group, we tend to go, oh, that's really interesting. That's a good idea. That's really insightful. That's maybe a little bit different than what we thought. And we're like, oh man, we just learned something. Did we? Did we learn something? Or did we find an outlier? Maybe the answer is the boring middle ground. And now we know. But we hear something interesting and we're like, oh my gosh, that has to be right because that's interesting. No, it doesn't have to be right. And we can't help it because our brains are so dumb. So treat these interesting things as hypotheses. We can then quant them out later. So model, get in for, especially if you have a client or you are out of ideas, go talk to customers. That's when it's best. When we're trying to see, also physical interaction, right? If you have a physical product, I love focus groups and I love watching people pick up stuff. And I love having an engineer in the room because they get really uncomfortable. They're not supposed to pick that up with their left hand. We're like, they're supposed to do whatever the hell they want, man. Like you just need to watch them and see how they interact with the product. They're supposed to turn it this way. But treat a lot of these interactions as hypotheses that you can then prove and quant out later. Fair enough? So here's how I want you to think about data. Here's how we think about data, okay? Qualitative data is very challenging to work with. It is made up of words and phrases that have no metadata behind them. That was the premise we used to create metadata. And so we think of data in two functions. One, big data and emotional data. So very simple differentiation. Big data is everywhere. Your organization gathers it, your clients' organizations gather it all the time. It is customer transaction data. It is analytics data. If you think about your website, for the most part, you can see who comes on, what they're doing, when they got there, when they left, where they went, how they got there. You can see you have transparency into all of these kind of user experiences on your website. Who, what, when, where, how. Here's a question. Why are they there? Why did they go from page 1 to page 4? Why did they bail in the middle of the form? The answer is you don't know. It's not that you aren't trying or that you're like an idiot. It is impossible information to know. It is uncorrelated information. You cannot discern why that someone does something based on what they do. You can only hypothesize. So what we typically do is we sit in this circle. I'm going to show you how the circle should look. On the other hand, emotional data is why only. And that is the only thing that our organization focuses on is that why. Why does this information happen? And that it's extremely hard to track. It was qual at first until we built a quant system to help quant out. Here's what it looks like. This is a very simple example. It looks like a data table because, well, it is a data table. But what our system does is we built a system that uses our own metadata that uses millisecond timing mechanisms. Why do we do that? Because Johns Hopkins says that the brain makes a decision 400 milliseconds. If that's not frustrating as a human being, it damn well should be, because we should be a little bit more thoughtful and conscientious. But man, we make our decisions quick. That first impression is concreted in our head. You know how long it takes the concrete to dry after it's in there for 400 seconds? Or 400 milliseconds? Another 400 milliseconds. So literally inside 1 second, your brain's emotions make a reaction, send the information objectively into your brain, and then once it sits there for only half a second, the concrete dries. Now you got to spend the rest of your time either trying to justifying one, if someone, you can see on their face, like maybe it's not a good, oh, I don't like this person, or, oh, I'm really into this, I'm really into this person. You're either validating that thing that happened in less than 1 second, or you're trying to fight it. And sometimes it can take years and years. And you can think about some of these personal relationships that you have. You had a bad first impression with someone and it took years and years and years to go away. And now you know them better, but for years you thought of them as a certain way and found out that it was wrong. That's how stupid our brains are. So what our system does, that first column of numbers, 0 to 100 tells you how mathematically, emotionally resonant an idea is. So the stuff that's all redacted is client stuff. And then we use that data and we can say, all right, I can see if I'm talking to a CEO, I need to talk about these two things. If I do that, I have the highest mathematical probability to say the thing that will drive the strongest emotional resonance. It's a way that we are quantifying emotion so that we're saying the right thing to the right people. And as long as you like money, this is a system that is good for your sales team and your marketing team. For your sales team in particular, marketing teams use this mostly for segmentation analysis. If I look at this, I see the CIO and the president have nothing in common, the two biggest decision makers for this particular service. That means I need to basically segment out my CEOs, my presidents, my CEOs, and my CIOs. So when we're looking at our email database, for instance, we need to make sure we're sending message number 3 to our CIO, because if we send message 1 and 2, he's gonna be bored out of his mind and it's not gonna connect. And conversely, if we send concept 3 to the CEO, we're missing the boat. So it's really just matching the correct emotions to the correct people or the correct industry sectors. There's all kinds of examples of doing this. So this is how we can figure out a way to put numbers to emotions, quant them out so that you can be more responsible. And some of these things that are written here redacted, some of these ideas come directly out of qualitative conversations. Remember I said treat them as hypotheses. They come right out of customer conversations. And sometimes, guess what? They're in the bottom and nobody cares and they go away. And every time you say them, you lose money. So you just got to be very, very careful. I have the most humbling job ever because there's a winner here, right? There's a winner, there's a silver medalist and there's a bronze medalist. And I am, I guess I have no idea when the data tells us what's right and what's wrong. But anyway, so this is how I want you to think about this data set. You are gathering big data. Typically, innovation starts with big data gathering. We see that only 30% of people that start our form finish our form. Well, maybe our form's too long. That's a hypothesis. Maybe we asked a question that they didn't like. Maybe there was an error that needs to debug in our form system on certain browsers. Maybe we asked a question that was too intrusive and they bailed at that question. Maybe there's a page break on mobile that made the question unanswerable or reset the form and then they had to start over. 5 very simple reasons to a made up form. Which of those is right? Some of them are easily technically solvable. Some of them are unknowable. So typically what we do is we go, well, let's solve that problem. And we start A/B testing and doing stuff and measuring over time. You know what we're doing? We're throwing away money because we're burning through leads that are coming into our funnel as this is happening. So with this innovation cycle typically just has big data, hypothesis, innovation, big data, hypothesis, innovation. We call that A/B testing, right? What you're missing is the third component, which is how do we quant out people's emotions that answer the question why they dropped? And you can get to now a very simple why somebody left a form is a pretty easy problem to solve. You can do a simple survey method and you could probably get to the answer to that pretty easily. But a more complex variable, a more complex situation like why is someone not buying your product? Our customers told us to build a product, we built it, and now they're not buying it. We want to move into a new sector. We think it's going to work. It makes sense to us. There are so many variables that exist inside of that scenario. It's unbelievable. Do you know how many variables exist in a typical advertising cycle, one campaign? We actually figured this out. It was, we had to be very, very conservative because the numbers got too big. A conservative estimate of a typical organization that will do one media campaign, 1.083 million. That's a small company. 1.083 million variables that exist in there. This is talking about messaging variables, medium variables, targeting variables, timing, and spend. Those just looking at those 5 elements. Which ones are you going to get right? Let's say you get one right. Let's say you get lucky. Which one was right? It's almost impossible to know this information. So being able to quant this stuff out is absolutely critical. So add that emotional data side in, and you see how this is a little bit more balanced of a cycle now? We got big data telling us who, what, when, where, how. We can, oh, well, maybe it's this. Let's find out why. Oh, now we know why. Now we can do it. When you're a leader, I always argue, leaders' jobs are dealing with why. And when you deal with why, really your business and your strategy becomes really easy. Your manager's job is to give you the who, what, when, where, how. Their job is to tell you the machine is broken and or the customers aren't buying something. And your job as a leader is to figure out why. And once you know that, life and business really become kind of easy. So that was I don't know if how much time that was. This was something that started out as an article, and we turned it into a webinar of something we call propaganda, because we're honoring, and no one would be stupid enough to call their web series propaganda. But so that's what we did. And then we gave it like a very Eastern Bloc look.
Oh, that's great. That's great, Grant. Really appreciate it. Hey, we had one question come in while you were chatting, and it was earlier. It was, I think, on the third answers are not accurate. You were talking about demographics, and then the question from Tony was, are buyer personas relevant, or just not the ones that? And I think there might be a typo, that interview a representative of said persona. So, to what degree are buyer personas relevant? And do you want to just address buyer personas in general?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's possible to be a fan and not a fan of personas at the same time, but I am. I've broken meaning analyzed hundreds and hundreds of organizational personas, because everybody has them. If you don't have them, you're not trying, right? When I said earlier that your brain has to wrap a box around something, we have to do the same thing with customers and people. Otherwise, it's very, very challenging for us to work with them. So it's a natural inclination to create a buyer persona. Now, I've broken down buyer personas where I can tell that the people that created them knew what they were doing. And I can see that there is quant behind some of the elements and some of the characteristics inside of a persona. And sometimes I can see that they are almost completely made up, or they are based on one or two customer conversations. And very typically that's what happens. And I typically know that because I can tell a lot of times just by looking at it without even doing any analysis, because of the level of detail that exists. Mary comes home from a hard day of work, and she's a single mom, and all she really wants to do is work out, but she has to go home and help out her kid. No, it's garbage right there. That story makes us feel very good. When you hear, because our brain very well, it's part of our primitive brain, right? We are a storytelling species. And when we hear that, it's like so comforting. It's like, oh my gosh, I totally understand Mary. Now go get her. How do I get someone that wants to work out and that's tired when she gets home and has two kids and is a single mom? There's only a few different characteristics we can work with. And the story is great, but typically they're absolutely not correct. And so one of the rules that we say is follow your buyer personas very cautiously. And one of my all-time favorite things to do is to think about your customer base in persona metrics that don't exist. So think about something that we call those experimental segments. Experimental segments are demographic and psychographic segments of customers that don't play by other people's rules. That's what we say. So what are other people's rules? Other people's rules are gender, age, household income, business demographics, gross revenue, employee count, number of widgets. These are all things that we use in order to segment our customer bases. Those are fine, but they're probably coincidences, right? Like Greg's manufacturing company, they're coincidences. There's something about his delivery that connects with someone that happens to own a manufacturing company. So what is an experimental demographic or experimental segment that you could create that would help you define your customer base better? This is a super useful exercise and can be a competitive advantage. So if you think about let me give you a very brief example. How much time do I have?
About 5 minutes. Well, and people can stay on as they want.
All right, this is a cool story. So some execs created this really cool product company, and it was a product for mom. It was a brilliantly executed product in my opinion. Basically what happens is if your mom is in a nursing home or she's by herself, you send her this package. They even built in elements of customization. You can put in pictures of your kids. It was very well done. And they were having a really hard time getting it off the ground. And one of the segments that they thought was significant was the distance that someone lived away from their mother. So you live in Manhattan, mom lives in Illinois. So they target these people, they target children, right, the adult children of mom, and say, hey, send this over to mom in Illinois. You don't get to see her that often, and she'll be really excited. And what we found was that we assessed that particular segment along with a bunch of other ones. But we actually found that segment was what did actually drive emotional resonance. And we were like, oh my God, it's kind of a cool thing. Distance that someone lives from their mom is a significant variable for this company. What we found, though, actually, was that it was backwards. We said, when we looked at the numbers, right, because we just look at numbers, we looked at the numbers and we said there's a trend, but the trend goes the opposite direction of the distance. That means that the more emotionally resonant someone is, the closer they live to their mom. And we said, you have the brand proposition backwards. This is not a mom, I miss you brand. This is a mom, I'm sorry, you live in the same town as I do, and I don't come and see you very often brand. So we said, change the emotional messaging from mom, I miss you to mom, I'm sorry, I don't come see you as much. And as soon as they did that, it was like, it broke through the gates and or broke the floodgates, and the product started to connect with the right people. I give them a huge amount of credit for that, because it was really cool that they were at least thinking outside of the box and coming up with an experimental demographic. They just kind of just barely were off by a little bit. But that's a really useful exercise in what is an experimental demographic and what is a standardized demographic that you have to use because you got to put it to Facebook,
Well, that's a great example, Grant. I appreciate that. Greg, you probably have a question there. I saw you took yourself
Yeah,
off.
I do, Grant. So I really like what you're saying about, use your qualitative to build your hypothesis. That's great. And that explains to me why, these interviews or focus groups do have value. It's just you have to treat them in a certain way. You shouldn't build your strategy off that, if I'm understanding you correctly. One thing we've done is we take a lot of what comes out of the focus groups or the interviews. And you mentioned, like, you do, 20 brand or attributes of something, of a product, and then you'll run it up and you'll run it for the emotional resonance. You'll just test people's resonance to that. Is it really just the time element to see how quickly people react? Or is it if you've got, 3 people, and out of those 3 people, in those 20 items that you think are matter, they say this top item over and over again? Follow me on that?
You mean in a qual function?
Yeah.
Sometimes people, so generally the rule when you're trained to do interviewing well is the first answer is garbage, the second answer is garbage, the third answer is close. And once they repeat themselves a couple times, you probably get close to what they're really thinking.
Okay.
And so that's kind of a general rule of interviewing, which is valuable. I always say, like, if you think so most often the first answer you'll get with someone is logic, and you need, immediately you got bad data right off the bat. The hard part about all this is, even when it's recorded, quantifying this data in a way that's useful is so challenging, because you have ideas, right? You're gaining ideas, and you might be getting to the root of them, but you're still well, are we going to, like, 2 people said this? Are we going to base our business model on this? I mean, are we going to base a campaign strategy on that? And it happens absolutely all the time. We call them knee jerk, it's knee jerk, right? We call them, like, just knee jerk campaigns. And most of the time they're a complete waste. I hope that answered your question correctly, Greg.
Right.
I know you were talking about timing. I guess I talked about timing a little bit. What else? All that nerdy crap, and nobody has any questions. I can't see the chat. What are you guys chatting about?
Exactly. They're I know there are questions out there. You can take yourself off mute if you would like to ask.
What if, well, Grant, obviously people's brains are overflowing and you've obviously convinced a lot of people or made your point. What if people want to get
silence is is convincing. I don't know if that's true, but
what if you did some new ones come in?
No, just some comments there. I know Tony had mentioned people had their hands up earlier, but I think that might have been in relation to Grant going through his exercise at the beginning.
I mean, obviously people can work with you and should, contact Grant. His information's there. But is there anything you can do to prime your company to, start to go down this road other than watch this presentation?
Well, your company is we're mostly marketing folks, yeah?
Right.
So we don't do any of the things that marketing companies do. We don't, we kind of joke and be like, we don't do anything. We do research. Our job is, so we're engaged for typically a couple of reasons. One is you have been challenged by your client to do some research, and it's maybe not something that you're comfortable with. You don't have a vendor partner, or it's a sophisticated client, and that they need good data, or that you're going to need good data to work with in order to execute. The second reason is people bring us in all the time as a part of an RFP, help close a large piece of business where maybe our track record and our approach is something that they can help them, give them an opportunity to win a piece of business. And again, our function only exists on the research side. So we always say our currency is what we call burning questions. So what is it that you want to know? Our job is only to give you the answers and the data around what it is you want to know. We can figure out lots of stuff, but that, at any given time, there's an old saying, it's like, if you give someone 3 things to do, they'll do all 3. And if you give them 4, they'll do 0. So we don't try to kind of boil the ocean. Be like, what are you working on right now? We can figure that out, and it'll probably set you up for a couple years, or your client up for a couple years, because of the depth and the breadth of data we can get around a particular area, like why a customer, how to increase sales in a certain segment. All those burning questions that come out of your big data where there's no easy answer, right? The easy answers are like accounting, finance, right? There's no accounting burning questions because you have all the data necessary. The hard stuff is what's inside people's heads. I can't figure out where there's something we're missing. What the hell is it? That's kind of our job, to figure out that weird thing.
And then Grant, is there usually a size of company at which point this type of analysis becomes cost prohibitive for them?
Yeah, I mean, we're not that expensive. We have invested a substantial amount of money in technology so that we operate like a manufacturing company. You know why we did that? Because we run ourselves through this process often, which is way harder than it sounds. It's kind of like performing surgery on yourself. But we listen. What do people like? They need to be very, very quick. They need to be cheap. They need to be highly actionable. Those are the 3 most important things. And so we built a business model around that. So we typically stay in the 5, like as far as client size, 5 million tends to be kind of on the lower end of stuff. And we tend to not go over $1 billion. The $1 billion organizations we have worked with are not very, are not maybe the most fun to work with. There's a lot of other things, variables and things you have to deal with organizations of that size and scope that aren't that much fun. So we don't like doing them, so we don't do them. And they got to have some budget, right? I mean, our typical study is about $25,000. So I mean, if you've got somebody that's got a $50,000 budget, I just took a humongous chunk out of your budget and may not be worth it. But sometimes if someone's trying to make a great impression, and they have a $250,000 budget, $25,000 expenditure to figure out stuff that no one else has been able to figure out, or to give you the right foot forward, is, could definitely be worth it.
Oh, great. Thanks. I appreciate it. Andrew, I saw you took yourself off mute. Did you have a question? Maybe not.
On my microphone, so it doesn't.
Oh.
I didn't take myself off. No.
Oh, okay.
I just, when I mute, I just hit the button on my microphone to fool guys like you.
Got it.
Totally would.
Nice work. I'm fascinated by the conversation, because we do a lot of the work in customer interviews, but in a very different way than what you're describing, in terms of how we gather the data. But the data gathered is never taken as the fact. It's truly a hypothesis that then we test within the organization. And there's a lot of methods in terms of data gathering with client base. We just completed an engagement with a group that, we asked them to start with, who's your top 10, and then give us a list. And we find, based on the data, people who don't do much business with them. And then we look for people who've stopped doing business with them. And in the conversations with each, we come in as a researcher from the market, not necessarily from that client, and gather very useful information. We just had an engagement that in the industrial transportation industry, that the findings that we got after testing and implementing, grew their business by about 70% in the last 6 months. So, but I think the biggest challenge with most of the qual data guys out there is that they're not trained, they don't know how to approach it, and they think that they're going after things that they're not. It kind of goes back to the days of surveys. We don't do print surveys hardly ever anymore. One, because the only result you get is people who fill out surveys. You get those opinions, and then you get people trying to figure out, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 meaning I love you and 1 meaning I hate you. If somebody gives you a 5, you've got people who actually think mathematically that means that a guy who got a 10 liked it twice as much as them. So there's a lot of nuance to what you're sharing that's quite interesting. And as a psychologist myself, we approach it in a very different way than most researchers do. And the data's we've got some great accomplishments behind it. So I appreciate the direction you're going, because it ought to, if people are looking for researchers to do that kind of work, it ought to eliminate about 90% of them out there, because they really don't know what they're asking, and they don't know what to do with what they're finding.
Yeah, we agree. And so interested in how you approach qual, because you're right. I mean, it seems like something anyone can do, but it's very, very, it can be way more damage than you can't good. In many ways, like, tools, readily available research tools, has caused more wealth destruction in this country than many other things, because you're giving someone a hammer that has no idea what a hammer is or how to swing it, and you're cutting them loose on their own company or a client's company, and it can be devastating.
Would you agree that some of the most powerful data you get out of qual is actually the themes rather than the facts that people share with you?
Yeah, very well said. So one of the things that Greg was talking about earlier, and we didn't mention is, so one of the things that we do is we found that we can test about 20 different independent, objective, and explicit ideas at once, and anything more than that, we run into some logistical problems on the people's side, not the analysis side, and one of the things that is sometimes we ignore what's in first place and second place and third place, but thematically we're trying to find what is it here. So we just did a thing with an insurance company where that was the solution. It was a little hard to put it together until you themed the elements together, and you said, people are anxious, you're not asking them enough questions, and that's what it boiled down to. And that wasn't explicit, but that was the result. And so we can theme together emotions. Is it going to be perfect? Well, no, nothing is. But many times that theme is substantially more important than particular objective points.
Yeah, well, an example of what I was referring to, very much in line with what you said, there was an industrial concern that told us the reason that people do business with us, and it was all product related. And it's a typical scenario. When we looked at it, it was basically all the things, oh, here we go. all the things these are my employees. It's time to go home. But the things that they were the proudest of, and they were out there marketing and standing behind, were table stakes in a poker game. It was basically just product and quality and things. But when we went and did the kind of study we're describing, the theme that came back was with data like, why do you do business with these guys? Well, they're the only ones who answer their phone. They're the only ones who can fix a problem. The themes in terms of how we changed the positioning of the company that really made a difference was personal touch, customer service, and humanity were the themes that came from it. And as we repositioned the company, they had massive growth because buyers who were dealing with their competitors that don't have any of those things, it was immediately recognized. So well, is it solid data, numerical data? No, but it was those themes were what we could build that repositioning statement and then base that as the core strategy to go forward.
Yeah, thematically, we've noticed that there may be a direct correlation that exists between conceptual commoditization of a business inside of an industry and the importance of humanity. That's so we see like a lot of banks and stuff. They may try to make CFO decisions. Hey, we're going to get rid of our customer service department and create automation because our break-even point is 18 months, and after that we drop $350,000 to the bottom line. This is good math decision. And we find out that, well, the call center that you're replacing is not a problem-solving medium. Your technical or information department believes that it is a problem-solving medium because that is their output, that is their lens. But this is a place where people can vent. This is a customer service type of an entity, and you're just thinking about it incorrectly.
I think there's a direct correlation between levels of automation that companies put on their customer service side and how few competitors they have.
Oh, good. I like that.
If you're the cable company in a neighborhood where there are no competitors, people are waiting on hold for 3 hours to yell at the machine, talk to a person. Whereas if there's 100 alternatives to your business that people can go to, that automation seems to be a lot less apparent. I have no data to back that up. That's my observation.
No, I think you're right on. That's great. It's like the pendulum doth swing, right?
Everything's a pendulum.
Yeah. And when automation, when it highly commoditized businesses or industries or perfectly competitive markets will always come back to people.
And in Greg's space and mine, we do a lot in the industrial space. And this is where what you're saying is so relevant. The more your product would be viewed as a commoditized product, nuts and bolts, nails, things that everyone has, the research that we're talking about done properly is so much more important because you can find the true motivators, depending on who your market is, to show them a value that would make them want to do business with you over all the other folks who kind of have the same thing you do. So, but those are my 2 cents.
We see something else to consider if you work a lot in that space is we kind of work all over the board, which is it's a good thing for my ADD, but bad thing from a marketing perspective. But there seems to be most of the time people assume that because we're quantifying emotional resonance and it comes in from somewhere to 0 to 100, right? It's going to be somewhere in there. And like consumer brands are going to have higher scores. We would assume like B2B is not. It's going to be low emotive, and we see the opposite typically. Typically, B2B relationships have substantially higher motivations. If people are like, well, how do you explain that? You're like, well, it's very simple. We're talking about a vendor that's in someone's supply chain. So if you're an assembler or you're a raw material provider, are you pretty damn emotive about their ability to get you raw material? Yeah, your business and your livelihood depends on it. So. People think, oh, well, you get low emotion in B2B. We tend to see the opposite.
So you think people get emotional when that 1 3-cent part isn't in production and they have to shut the plant down? That's weird. I never thought of that.
And it stops $150,000 thing from throwing off the line.
Yeah. No production today. We're missing that washer.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, great conversation. Thanks for interjecting there, Andrew.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet Andrew. Thanks for doing good work out there, man. Keep her up.
You're welcome, I think.
Andrew,
I appreciate it.
Andrew, I think Grant might be a nice guest in your show, perhaps.
I don't know. Can you sing and dance?
Sometimes only Italian arias. That's my thing. That's
That's why I said it.
Sounds like Andrew's next on your list, Greg, for a guest or speaker.
Yeah.
Andrew's got a great podcast out there, everybody. So check him out, connect with him.
Yeah. I'd like your contact info too.
One more guy named Grant to spam me. Is that what?
That's right. You used to be able to throw a stick and hit somebody doing qualitative research, but we don't have anybody in this town that I recommend. And this is a big city.
Yeah, I'll find you on the old linked machine and send you a connect.
You know, this is what crafts marketing is all about, because Andrew was the guy who was ready to come out guns blazing.
I was not.
When he heard the title, he's like, wait. So now everybody's buds. That's awesome.
Let's qualify that. I wrote to Greg this morning and said I'd love to listen to this because I love the provocative title. There was no effort in guns blazing. I would never want to blow up your presentation.
It was an honor. Yeah. It was an honorary title, to be certain.
But Grant, thanks so much for do we have any other questions, Steve? I don't want to get
no, just a request for Grant to go out singing an aria. That's all.
Come on.
So take us home, Grant. No, but no, everything is great. Greg, I'll leave it up to you to close it out.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Grant. Really appreciate it. Illuminating as always.
Hey, thanks, Madison crew. I know everybody has to go to work or go home. I got to go home to my little kiddos. It's a pleasure to see everybody. Thanks for having me on and hanging out. And Greg, good to see you. Steve, good to see you.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll have you back. We'll have you back next year when we're in person.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
All right.
Hang out for a day. Thanks all.
Thanks, Grant.